Let's go ahead and take a look at our next particle creation method, operator, generator. This is going to be called Object2Particle, and for this we're going to go ahead and remove that plane. We're going to go ahead and switch out of this view for a second, and we're going to animate this sphere that we've got. We're just going to tell him to kind of rotate and scale on his local axis a bunch of different ways. And finally get him back up here until frame 100. We'll send him back to his original configuration. So you can see we just have this sphere kind of rotating and scaling around. What we want to do then is we're going to use this sphere as a particle. Basically say use whatever max node we have and turn them into a particle that we can use within the system. Object2Particle, it has an interface here. We're going to use pick object. It's going to pick that object. We'll see it appear. And then what happens, you can see the rest of these are still grayed out. We have to actually have a selection to use. So we're going to go ahead and select the sphere 01. And now that we've got sphere 01 selected, we can see that we get these other options available. We can tell it what group to go into. We're going to go ahead and say born into the, let's do the born in the blue group. We can do this tracking. Tracking is going to specify what's the interaction between the particle and the node versus the node of the particle. If we say track none, it's basically going to that blue color doesn't show up very well. Let's actually go into the master dynamic, turn on ticks. Let's do flakes. It's a little bit more blue. Let's select that blue and make it a little brighter. Okay. So you should be able to see that blue guy right there. What's happening is as this object moves around, that particle just stays there. That's because there is no tracking. If we track Object2Particle, this says use the object to drive the particle. And so now you can see that particle just snapped over to the node. The particle is going to, let's switch that. Let's switch it to the red so that we can actually see it a little better. So you can see that red particle is following the node as it roams around. But we still see the original mesh for the node. We have this hide button here. We'll go ahead and hide that. And what you see now is you can see the particle all by itself roaming around. But let's say we also wanted to use the shape of that node. We have an instant shape here. We'll turn that on. And so now we see a nice big red sphere. This is actually using all the shape information from that source object. And the particle now has his shape. And then use subtree is in the case if that node had subchildren meshes, kind of a hierarchy of meshes. Anyway, we can unhide the source node. You can see it kind of gives that double draw issue there. We'll go ahead and hide them. And then let's also create another sphere out here. And we will animate him as well, just much simpler. And let's take a look. Let's go ahead and then also pick another object. We're going to pick that second sphere. And now we can select each one of these individually, and we can see that these parameters are different for each one. This allows us to say, I want sphere 2, this purple sphere, to be part of the green group. I want him to track Object2Particle. I want him to use the node to drive the particle. And I want to use that node's shape for the particle. And let's go ahead and hide him. Now that green on the purple looks really good. Okay, so what happens is now sphere 1 is going to be a red particle with Object2Particle and instant shape, and sphere 2 is going to be a green particle with those settings. Now it's very common if you have quite a few nodes out in the scene and you want them all to be part of the same particle group. If this list gets really long and you have a lot of picking to do, there's this changes affect all button. And what this does is, when this is on, any changes that we make to these parameters are going to affect all of the source nodes there. So now both of these These used to be different. Now they're both going to be blue with object particle and instant shape. Okay, something else just to take quick note of is the different kind of tracking called particle to object. To do this, we're actually going to remove that sphere 2 that we were using. We'll unhide all. We'll refresh. We'll get rid of that sphere. And you can see it's still being born into the blue group. Let's switch that around to the red. And let's do this. We're going to say when this object is turned into a particle, we want to actually see what the effect of particle to object is. And what this will do is this will say whatever's happening to the particle, I want you to apply that to the object itself, to the original max node. Okay, so let's go up to operators standard and let's take a velocity, and we'll set that velocity. Let's do a negative y value and a little bit of speed. So you remember that beige node that we see here used to have its own animation keys, but now it's just kind of moving back with the particle. There's no scaling, no rotation or anything. That's because the node is now being driven by the particle. That's what this tracking does. So just remember, if you want the node, all the node's animation to control the particle, you want object particle. If you want the particle to affect the max node, then it's going to be a particle to object. And then if you don't want any tracking, you just want to say use the position of that node to create a particle, use the none. You can also use the instant shape with that too, of course.